The message arrived at 3:02 Earth Standard Time. Ambassador Daniel Reyes was awake when it came through. Not because he expected trouble, no one ever expected trouble in the Concord Hall, but because sleep had been difficult lately. The window in his quarters aboard Athos Prime Station looked out onto nothing but endless stars, and sometimes that kind of silence made a man restless. He was halfway through a report from the agricultural colony on New Manila when the lights on his desk turned red. Not amber. Not yellow. Red. Every screen in the room went dark except one. A single line appeared. Emergency session, full council, immediate attendance required. Daniel stared at it for 3 seconds. In 4 years as Earth's representative to the Galactic Concord Council, he had never seen a full emergency call. Not once. The council met often. Trade disputes, border negotiations, the usual endless diplomacy that came with managing 42 different civilizations. But emergency sessions were something else entirely. Emergency sessions meant war. He stood slowly, heart already beating faster. Outside his door the corridor lights had shifted to the same crimson glow. Other doors were opening along the curved hallway as delegates from dozens of species stepped out into the passage. No one spoke. They all knew. Athos Prime Station floated in the empty space between 3 major hyperlane routes, a neutral meeting place older than most civilizations in the Council. The station itself had been built by a species that no longer existed, a quiet reminder that even the greatest empires eventually vanished. Its walls looked like glass but felt like stone. The architecture curved in impossible angles that human engineers still couldn't fully explain. Everything about the station whispered the same truth. You are young. Humanity had only been part of the Council for 130 years. Most of the other species had been navigating the stars for thousands. Daniel adjusted his jacket as he walked through the corridor toward the Concord Hall. Delegates hurried ahead of him, floating forms of living gas, towering insectoid diplomats, small fur-covered creatures moving quickly on delicate legs. Fear moved through the hallway like a current. When Daniel reached the massive doors of the council chamber, he paused. Inside voices were raised. Not the calm, measured tones of diplomacy. These were sharp, uneven, afraid. He pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The Concord Hall was enormous, built like a vast bowl with 42 seats arranged in a wide circle around a central holographic platform. Each seat was designed for the biology of its species. One was filled with heated water where an amphibious delegate floated. Another contained a dense atmosphere of methane for a species that breathed something no human could survive. One seat was simply a swirling cloud held in place by a containment field. Every seat was occupied. And every single delegate looked terrified. At the center of the chamber stood High Arbiter Zorith, the chairman of the council. His species, the Valari, resembled tall insectoid figures covered in black chitin armor. 6 legs supported his thin frame while 4 arms folded tightly across his chest. His golden compound eyes moved constantly, scanning the room. Zorith had led the council for more than 2 centuries. Daniel had never seen him look uncertain before. Tonight he did. The Arbiter activated the central hologram. The lights dimmed. A map of the galaxy appeared in the air above the platform. For a moment nothing moved. Then 3 star systems near the outer spiral arm turned red. One after another. A quiet gasp spread through the chamber. Zorith spoke. His voice was translated instantly by the station systems into calm human language, but Daniel could hear the clicking tremor underneath. The Ven Dominion has launched a full military invasion. The hologram zoomed closer. 3 systems burned red. The Alori Republic, the Drew Collective, and the Macron Union have been attacked simultaneously. Another pause. The Macron homeworld has been destroyed. The chamber went silent. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Zorith continued. Preliminary casualty estimates indicate 4 billion dead. 4 billion. Daniel had visited the Macron world once during a cultural exchange. It had been a beautiful planet, covered in forests of golden crystal trees that sang softly when the wind moved through them. Now it was gone. Reduced to ash and molten rock. The hologram shifted again. A face appeared. Gray skin. Deep-set eyes glowing faint orange. A predator's calm expression. Warlord Thyrax, Zorith said quietly. Commander of the Ven Dominion fleet. The warlord leaned forward in his chair and spoke slowly. His translated voice filled the hall. We will advance no further, if the council complies with our request. The map zoomed out again. 12 star systems lit up in red. You will surrender these territories to the Dominion, Thyrax said calmly. Daniel felt his chest tighten when he saw 2 of the names. New Manila. Shenzhen IV. Human colonies. 20 million people. You have 1 week, the warlord finished. If you refuse, we will continue our advance. His eyes flickered with cold certainty. And we will not stop until this council no longer exists. The hologram vanished. Silence filled the Concord Hall. Daniel Reyes realized something in that moment. The galaxy was about to decide whether 20 million human beings were worth saving. And judging by the fear in the room, the answer might already have been decided. For several seconds after the hologram vanished, no one spoke. 42 civilizations sat in the Concord Hall staring at the empty projection field where Warlord Thyrax's face had been. 4 billion dead. The number hung over the chamber like gravity. Ambassador Daniel Reyes slowly sat down in the small human seat along the outer ring of the council. Humanity had been given one of the smallest platforms when they first joined the Concord, symbolic of their youth among the older civilizations. Tonight it felt smaller than ever. High Arbiter Zorth finally moved. The council will now deliberate, he said. His voice was calm, but the subtle clicking beneath the translation system betrayed something else. Fear. The first delegate to speak was the Torvon representative. The Torvon were an ancient species, broad-bodied creatures with 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows across their faces. Their empire controlled dozens of star systems and one of the largest fleets in council space. When the Torvon spoke, others usually listened. The situation is mathematically clear, the delegate said. His voice was deep and steady, completely without emotion. The Ven Dominion fleet currently outnumbers the combined military forces of the Concord Council by approximately 3 to 1. The hologram flickered again, showing fleet projections. The numbers were ugly. We must consider survival, the Torvon continued. If we engage them directly, we risk losing not 12 systems. He paused. But everything. A quiet murmur spread around the chamber. Daniel felt his hands tighten against the armrests of his seat. The next speaker was the Chinari delegate, a tall, thin creature wrapped in shimmering scales that shifted color with each movement. The Torvon analysis is correct, she said softly. We are not prepared for a war of this magnitude. More murmurs. The Chinari continued. The Varn demand 12 systems. If surrendering them prevents the destruction of 42 civilizations, then the logical choice is clear. Logical. Daniel stared at the glowing map. 12 systems. 2 of them human. The Alori delegate suddenly stood. The Alori were small creatures covered in silver fur with wide dark eyes and delicate hands. Their species had evolved on a cold world and always seemed slightly fragile compared to the larger council races. Tonight she looked devastated. You cannot mean this, she said, her voice shaking. She pointed toward the hologram where the Macron system had been marked. They destroyed an entire world. They burned our cities from orbit. My people are hiding underground right now while their ships patrol our skies. Her voice broke. If you give them what they want, they will do it again. No one answered her. The Drew delegate, whose species resembled tall skeletal figures wrapped in pale skin, sat completely still, their long fingers folded together in silence. Their homeworld was one of the 12 systems being demanded. Daniel watched the discussion unfold. One by one, delegates began speaking. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Calmly. Reasonably. The Sulvine representative supported surrender. The Harkeys Union agreed. The Valorian Trade Guild suggested negotiating additional concessions to avoid conflict. Every argument sounded careful, logical, responsible, and every single one led to the same conclusion. Sacrifice the few to save the many. Daniel felt something cold settle inside his chest. The map changed again. Population estimates appeared next to the targeted systems. New Manila, 12 million inhabitants. Shenzhen IV, 8 million inhabitants. 20 million people. Farmers, teachers, families, children who had probably just gone to sleep believing the galaxy was a peaceful place. The council was discussing them the same way someone might discuss shipping costs. The Alori delegate was crying now. Her small shoulders shook as she tried to speak again. If you surrender us, if you give our worlds away. Her voice cracked completely. There will be nothing left of us. Still no one answered. High Arbiter Zorth finally raised one of his upper arms. The chamber slowly quieted. His golden eyes moved across the circle of delegates before settling on Daniel. Ambassador Reyes, he said. Every gaze in the chamber turned toward the human seat. Daniel suddenly felt the weight of 42 civilizations staring at him. The council will now hear Earth's position, Zorth said. Daniel stood slowly. He looked around the chamber. At the Torvon, At the Chinari. At the delegates who had calmly voted to hand his people over to a warlord. He looked at the Alori ambassador, still trembling with quiet grief. Then he looked at the empty hologram space where Thyrax had stood. Everyone in the room expected the same thing. They expected anger. Or desperation. Or begging. Instead, Daniel spoke quietly. Earth requests 48 hours before issuing its response. The chamber went completely silent. No one had expected that. No arguments. No outrage. No emotional appeal. Just a simple request. Zoratha's eyes narrowed slightly. 48 hours? He repeated. Yes, Daniel said calmly. That is all Earth requires. He nodded once to the council. Then he turned and walked toward the chamber doors. Behind him, the Concord Hall remained silent. No one moved. No one spoke. High Arbiter Zorath watched the human ambassador leave the room. The old Arbiter had spent 300 years studying civilizations. Over that time he had learned something important. The species that shouted the loudest were rarely the ones you had to worry about. The dangerous ones were the ones who became quiet. And right now humanity had become very, very quiet. Ambassador Daniel Reyes did not return to his quarters immediately after leaving the Concord Hall. Instead, he walked through the silent corridors of Athros Prime until he reached a small observation balcony that overlooked the endless dark of interstellar space. For a moment he simply stood there. Stars drifted slowly past the station's massive viewing window. Some were familiar navigation beacons along the major trade routes. Others were distant and nameless. Somewhere among them were 2 human colonies that 42 alien civilizations had just agreed were acceptable losses. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then he activated his private communicator. The message he recorded was short. 2 words. It's time. He attached a security cipher older than the Concord Council itself. Blackthorn Protocol. Then he transmitted it. The signal left Athros Prime and jumped into faster-than-light relay space. 7 minutes later it reached Earth. Deep beneath the old city of Geneva, far below the public buildings and diplomatic centers where the United Earth government conducted its normal business, a red light began to blink. It had never blinked before. The bunker where it flashed officially did not exist. The personnel stationed there were among the most carefully vetted individuals in human history. Every one of them had sworn secrecy not just to their government, but to humanity itself. For decades their job had been simple. Watch the light. Hope it never turns on. Tonight it did. The first technician who saw it froze for a full second before reaching for the alarm switch. Blackthorn activation confirmed, she said into the secure channel. Within seconds the entire facility came alive. Doors opened. Screens lit up. Encrypted communication lines connected across the solar system. Above the bunker, most of Earth continued sleeping peacefully. Below, the largest contingency plan ever created by the human species began to move. The President of the United Earth Government received the alert 17 minutes later. She was already awake when the message arrived. Heads of state rarely slept well during times of galactic tension. When the encrypted briefing reached her tablet, she read it twice. Then she looked up at the intelligence director standing in her office doorway. "Are we certain?" she asked quietly. The director nodded once. Ambassador Reyes used the authorization code personally. That meant the situation had passed the final threshold. The president stood. Begin implementation. Across human space, sealed orders began to unlock. Military bases from Mars orbit to the distant mining stations of the Kuiper Belt opened encrypted files that had been written decades earlier and updated every single year since. Commanders read them in silence. Then they began making calls. Ships that had sat dormant for years started receiving activation signals. Navigation computers loaded coordinates that had never been used before. Personnel who thought their careers would end quietly were suddenly reassigned to classified operations. Within 4 hours, a secret known only to a handful of human leaders began to awaken. Fleet Admiral Marcus Rourke was sitting on the porch of his cabin in northern Canada when the call came. Snow fell softly across the frozen lake in front of him. The world was quiet. He had retired 5 years earlier after nearly 4 decades in the United Earth Navy. The scar running down the side of his face had been earned in a border skirmish with pirates 20 years ago. The same attack had taken his daughter. He rarely thought about that night anymore. Some memories were too heavy to carry every day. His phone rang. Rourke glanced at the screen. The number was encrypted. He closed his eyes briefly before answering. Rourke speaking. The voice on the other end was calm. "Admiral, Blackthorn Protocol has been activated." Rourke did not ask questions. There was only one reason that code would ever be used. A transport shuttle will arrive at your location in 12 minutes, the voice continued. Yes, Rourke said simply. The call ended. For a moment he stood quietly on the porch, watching the snow fall across the trees. Then he went inside. 10 minutes later he stepped back out wearing his old uniform. His travel bag was already packed. When the military shuttle descended through the clouds and landed on the frozen field beside the cabin, Admiral Marcus Rourke was waiting. As the hatch opened, he looked once more at the silent winter landscape. The galaxy had finally reached the moment humanity had spent a century preparing for. And now the plan would begin. 3 hours after leaving Earth, Admiral Marcus Rourke stepped onto the command deck of Fort Achilles. From the outside, the installation looked like nothing more than a drifting asteroid. A cold, irregular rock tumbling slowly through the darkness of the Oort Cloud, billions of kilometers beyond Pluto's orbit. Sensors passing nearby would detect nothing unusual. Just ice, dust, silence. Inside the asteroid, however, was something very different. Fort Achilles was the most heavily fortified military installation humanity had ever built. The rock had been hollowed out over 40 years by autonomous mining machines and shielded beneath layers of radar-absorbing alloys and gravitational distortion fields that hid it from almost every known detection method. Only a handful of people in the entire human government knew it existed. Rourke stepped onto the main observation platform and stopped. Below him stretched a cavern the size of a city. Docking bays lined the walls in tiered rows that curved around the interior like massive terraces. Each one contained a warship. Thousands of them. The cavern lights began to brighten as the Admiral approached the viewing rail. One by one, dark hulls emerged from the shadows. Destroyers, cruisers, carrier platforms, heavy dreadnoughts. 4,000 vessels sat in silent formation, their hulls painted matte black to absorb starlight. For decades they had waited here. Hidden. Forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. Now technicians moved across the docking platforms like swarms of insects. Engine crews powered up reactor cores that had not run in years. Blue light began to glow across the cavern as ships awakened. Standing beside Rourke was a small woman wearing a white research coat. Dr. Lian Zhao had spent the last 25 years inside this fortress. Her dark hair was streaked with early gray, and she wore a pair of thin glasses despite the fact that advanced medical implants had corrected her eyesight decades ago. When Rourke had once asked her why she still wore them, she had given a simple answer. They help me think. Welcome back, Admiral, Zhao said quietly. Rourke nodded. I was hoping never to see this place again. Zhao handed him a data tablet. Most of us were. He scanned the briefing quickly. Everything Ambassador Reyes had seen in the council chamber was there. The Varn invasion. The destroyed Macron world. The council debate. The decision to surrender human colonies. Rourke's jaw tightened slightly. How long have we known the Varn would eventually do this? He asked. 32 years, Zhao replied. Rourke looked up. 32. Zhao nodded. Their expansion pattern is extremely predictable. Every few decades they push further inward. Each time they threaten violence, the council negotiates away another border system. She folded her arms. It has happened 17 times in the last 400 years. Rourke looked out across the massive fleet. And humanity decided to break the pattern. Yes. Zhao gestured toward the cavern. For 130 years we have allowed the galaxy to believe our navy was small. She paused. Behind the curtain we built this. The lights in the cavern brightened further as more ships powered up. Engines hummed. Energy conduits glowed along the hulls. Rourke watched the awakening fleet in silence. 4,000 warships. Enough to challenge the largest military power in the known galaxy. But Zhao was not finished. There's something else you need to see. She led him away from the observation platform down a corridor lined with reinforced bulkheads. Technicians rushed past them, carrying equipment and shouting activation codes into communication units. The fortress had come alive. They reached a secure chamber at the far end of the corridor. Zhao placed her hand against the biometric scanner beside the door. The heavy blast shield slid open. Inside the room was a single object resting on a raised platform. It was about the size of a human torso. Smooth. Perfectly round. Its surface reflected the cold blue lights of the chamber like dark water. What is it? Rourke asked. Zhao stepped beside the platform. Collapse warhead, she said quietly. Mark 7. Rourke frowned. Explain. Zhao tapped a control panel. A hologram appeared above the weapon. When detonated, the warhead generates a localized gravitational singularity. Rourke stared at her. You mean? A temporary black hole, Zhao finished. It lasts approximately 4 seconds. The hologram displayed the effect. A sphere of darkness expanding violently through space. Everything within a 200-kilometer radius is pulled inward and compressed beyond atomic density. The projection collapsed into nothing. Rourke looked back at the weapon. How many do we have? Zhao met his eyes calmly. Enough. Enough to erase fleets. Enough to destroy planets. Enough to end civilizations. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Rourke turned away and headed toward the command center. Hundreds of officers were already assembling inside the main operations hall. They stood as he entered. He stopped at the central command console and looked across the room. Every face was waiting for him. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, Blackthorn Protocol is now active. A large holographic map of the galaxy appeared above the command floor. Navigation coordinates began calculating automatically. Our fleet will be combat-ready within 36 hours. The officers listened in absolute silence. Rourke pointed toward the glowing center of the map. Not toward human territory. Not toward the border. Toward the heart of Varn space. We are not preparing to defend, he said. We are preparing to end this. The command center of Fort Achilles was silent after Admiral Rourke finished speaking. Hundreds of officers stood around the circular operations floor while the massive holographic map of the galaxy rotated slowly above them. Blue stars marked Allied territory. White stars marked neutral systems. And far across the spiral arm, a cluster of red markers showed the expanding border of the Ven Dominion. Rourke studied it for a long moment. Dr. Zhao, he said finally. She stepped forward. Bring up the historical model. The star map shifted. Red lines began appearing across the galaxy like cracks spreading through glass. These are the Varn expansion routes over the last 4 centuries, Zhao explained. The officers watched as the timeline accelerated. Every 50 or 60 years the same pattern repeated. A border civilization would be attacked. The Galactic Council would meet in emergency session. Negotiations would begin. And eventually, the Council would surrender territory. 12 systems. 7 systems. Sometimes just 1. But always enough to keep the Varn satisfied. For a while. Until the next war. Zhao paused the display. 17 red lines now marked the map. 17 civilizations, she said quietly. Destroyed or absorbed by the Dominion. A heavy silence settled across the command center. Captain Mara Singh, Rourke's executive officer, stepped closer to the projection. And no one ever stopped them? No, Zhao replied. Because the Council believes peace must be preserved at any cost. Singh frowned. That isn't peace. Zhao nodded. No. It's delay. The map shifted again. A new blue line appeared. Human expansion. Smaller. Much smaller. Humanity had joined the interstellar community only 130 years earlier, long after most galactic borders had already been drawn. When humans arrived, the pattern was already established. Threat. Negotiation. Sacrifice. Repeat. Rourke clasped his hands behind his back. When Earth joined the Council, he said slowly, our diplomats realized something very quickly. The officers listened closely. We weren't entering a peaceful galaxy. He looked at the red expansion routes again. We were entering a protection racket. A few officers exchanged glances. Rourke continued. Every species believed they were safe because the Council existed. He gestured toward the 17 destroyed civilizations. They weren't. Zhao nodded slightly. That realization led to the creation of Blackthorn Protocol. She expanded the hologram. A second set of projections appeared, this time showing simulations. In each one the same scenario unfolded. The Varn eventually demanded human territory. The Council debated. Human colonies were offered as a compromise. Rourke tapped the console. And every simulation ended the same way. The projection showed New Manila burning under orbital bombardment. Another simulation showed Shenzhen IV falling to invasion. Billions dead across decades. Humanity slowly losing system after system. Earth's government saw the future very clearly, Zhao said. So they made a decision. The hologram shifted again. Fort Achilles appeared. Then another hidden installation. Then another. Construction timelines filled the air. Shipyards built in secret. Weapons research hidden inside civilian programs. Intelligence networks quietly studying every major military power in the galaxy. For the last century, Zhao said, humanity has allowed the Council to believe we were weak. Rourke looked around the room. We were never weak. The fleet below the command center continued powering up. Engine signatures appeared one by one on the tactical display. Destroyers first, then cruisers, then the massive dreadnoughts. 4,000 ships. Zhao folded her arms. The purpose of the fleet was never conquest. Rourke nodded. Deterrence. Captain Singh spoke carefully. So the plan is to threaten them into backing down. Rourke shook his head. No. He pointed toward the Varn capital system glowing red on the star map. We're not threatening their borders. The navigation system highlighted a jump route directly to the Varn homeworld. Gasps moved quietly through the command center. We're threatening their existence. The room fell silent. Zhao spoke softly. For species like the Varn, fear of defeat isn't enough. She pointed to the map. But fear of extinction. She let the sentence hang. Rourke looked at the assembled officers. For centuries the galaxy has believed humans were inexperienced. He gestured toward the awakening fleet. Tonight we correct that mistake. The navigation computer finished calculating. Jump coordinates appeared on every tactical screen. Destination, Korvax's system. The heart of the Ven Dominion. Rourke turned toward the operations crew. All ships report readiness. Fleet power at 40% and climbing, an officer replied. Expected full activation in 30 hours. Rourke nodded. Good. He looked back at the map of the galaxy. Soon the entire council would see what humanity had built in the shadows. But first, they needed the ambassador. Because the real battle would not begin with weapons. It would begin with a message. The 48 hours passed slowly across the galaxy. For Ambassador Daniel Reyes they passed even slower. When he walked back toward the Concord Hall on Athras Prime, the corridors were already crowded. Delegates, aides, observers and representatives from dozens of minor civilizations had gathered around the chamber entrance. Word had spread far beyond the council. The galaxy wanted to know what humanity would do. Some expected surrender. Others expected anger. No one knew the truth. Inside the chamber, every seat was filled. Even species that rarely attended emergency sessions had arrived. Floating clouds of gas, towering reptilian diplomats, insectoid observers perched along the upper tiers. 42 council members. Hundreds of witnesses. And at the center of the hall, projected above the main platform, was the holographic form of Warlord Thyrax. He had demanded to attend the session. The Conqueror wanted to watch the council accept his terms. Thyrax sat on a massive chair carved from the bones of some enormous creature, his gray face calm and confident. Predators liked to watch their prey surrender. High Arbiter Zorith raised one of his arms. The council session will now resume. His voice echoed across the chamber. Ambassador Reyes requested 48 hours before delivering humanity's response to the Ven Dominion ultimatum. Zorith turned slowly toward the human representative. That time has now expired. Every eye in the room focused on Daniel. He walked calmly to the center of the chamber. He wore the same dark diplomatic suit as before. No medals. No symbols. Just a small data chip held between two fingers. He placed it into the central console. For a moment nothing happened. Then the holographic display activated. At first it showed only stars. Then the image expanded. Data began filling the air around the platform. Star charts. Fleet deployments. Supply routes. Military bases. Command structures. Layer after layer of information appeared until the entire chamber was filled with glowing projections. The data belonged to one civilization. The Ven Dominion. Every military secret they possessed was now floating in front of the council. Gasps spread through the chamber. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, staring at the projections. The Torvan representative whispered something urgently to his aides. The Chinari delegate's scales flickered in alarm. The level of detail was impossible. Fleet locations. Encryption codes. Defensive grids. The entire strategic infrastructure of the Dominion had been exposed. High Arbiter Zorith stared at the projections, his golden eyes moving rapidly. Ambassador Reyes, he said slowly. How did Earth obtain this information? Daniel looked at him calmly. We watched. The room went completely silent. For 130 years, Daniel continued, the Council has considered humanity a young species. He gestured toward the surrounding delegates. We were given the smallest seat in this chamber. No one spoke. You told us we needed time to understand how the galaxy works. He paused. And you were right. Daniel tapped the console again. The data reorganized. A map of Varn territory appeared. At its center, a single star system glowed red. Corvaxis. The Varn homeworld. For a century, Daniel said quietly, humanity studied this galaxy. The projections began highlighting historical events. Wars. Negotiations. Territory exchanges. Every time a powerful empire threatened violence, the Council had responded the same way. By sacrificing someone else. You call this diplomacy, Daniel said. His voice was calm. But the words landed like stones. We call it a pattern. The room remained silent. Even Warlord Thyrax had stopped smiling. Daniel looked directly at the holographic warlord. The Ven Dominion is simply the latest empire to exploit that pattern. Thyrax leaned forward in his chair. You think information changes anything? He said. His voice was slow and confident. You are a minor species with a handful of colonies. He gestured dismissively. The Council may fear us. But you. His eyes glowed brighter. Are nothing. Daniel did not react. Instead he tapped the console one final time. The hologram changed again. This time it showed a live feed from deep space. At first the image looked empty. Stars scattered across the darkness. Then something began blocking them. One by one. Small shadows moving across the starlight. Ships. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. They emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Destroyers. Cruisers. Carrier groups. And behind them. Massive dreadnoughts kilometers long. The fleet continued arriving until the stars themselves were hidden behind a wall of dark metal. 4,000 warships. Human warships. The Concord Hall erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted. Observers stumbled backward. One water tank tipped over as the Torvon representative stood in shock. High Arbiter Zorith stared at the display, his upper arms spreading wide in disbelief. Daniel spoke over the noise. Earth would like to present a counteroffer. The hall slowly fell quiet again. He looked directly at the warlord. Full withdrawal from all occupied systems. His voice remained steady. 72 hours. The projection zoomed closer to the fleet now holding position at the edge of Varn territory. If the Dominion refuses, Daniel said quietly, our fleet will advance. Silence fell over the Concord Hall. For the first time since the meeting began. Warlord Thyrax did not speak. The capital city of Dravan was carved into the side of a black mountain. For 1,000 years it had been the heart of the Ven Dominion, a fortress city of iron towers and deep stone corridors that stretched miles beneath the planet's crust. Every conquest the Dominion had ever achieved had begun in the war chamber beneath that mountain. Tonight, for the first time in its history, that chamber felt uncertain. Warlord Thyrax stood at the center of the room while 12 members of the Dominion High Command watched the holographic projections hovering above the strategy table. The images came from long-range sensors positioned at the edge of Varn space. 4,000 human warships. The numbers had been confirmed by 3 separate reconnaissance vessels. The fleet was real. No illusions. No sensor trickery. Just raw military power waiting in the darkness. General Corvus, the oldest member of the Command Council, slammed his remaining fist onto the table. This is deception, he growled. The veteran general had lost his left arm during a campaign 40 years earlier, and the scar across his face twisted when he spoke. The humans are weak. Everyone knows this. He pointed angrily toward the projection. They have barely 24 colonies and a small defense fleet. This armada is impossible. Thyrax said nothing. Instead he activated another recording. The chamber lights dimmed. A battle replay appeared above the table. 12 hours earlier, 3 Varn cruisers had encountered a small group of human patrol ships near the disputed border systems. The Varn commanders had acted on standard orders. Engage. Destroy. Demonstrate dominance. The battle had lasted 9 seconds. The recording showed the Varn cruisers firing first. Massive plasma lances tore through space toward the human vessels. But when the weapons reached their targets, the human ships were gone. Not destroyed. Simply not there. They had moved with a speed that defied conventional physics, repositioning themselves in impossible vectors before returning fire. 3 brief flashes of white light followed. Then 3 Varn cruisers vanished. Not damaged. Not crippled. Erased. The sensors had recorded a strange gravitational distortion at the moment of destruction. A ripple in space itself. The projection ended. Silence filled the chamber. Fleet Commander Zella spoke carefully. She was the youngest officer present, but also the most decorated. Our scientists cannot explain the weapon signature, she said quietly. It does not match any known energy system. Corvus scowled. Experimental technology. Perhaps, Zella said. But experimental weapons do not usually erase 3 cruisers simultaneously. Thyrax finally spoke. They positioned their fleet at the edge of our territory. He enlarged the star map. The human armada glowed blue against the red border of Varn's space. They are not threatening our outer colonies. The projection shifted. A new line appeared. A jump path leading directly toward a single star. Corvaxis. The Varn homeworld. They aimed their fleet here, Thyrax finished. No one spoke. Corvus slowly sat down. For centuries the Dominion had ruled through absolute certainty. They were the strongest power in known space. Every species they had encountered eventually surrendered. But now, an unknown fleet with unknown weapons had appeared without warning and positioned itself within striking distance of their capital world. Fleet Commander Zella folded her arms. This is not a bluff, she said. They crossed half the galaxy undetected. They exposed our military secrets before the entire council. She looked directly at Thyrax. And they gave us 72 hours. The warlord stared at the hologram. For the first time in many years he felt something unfamiliar. Not fear exactly, but the awareness of a new variable. The humans had watched the Dominion for over a century, studied them, prepared for them. And now they were standing at the gates of Varn space with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. General Corvus spoke again, though his voice had lost its earlier certainty. What if they are bluffing? Thyrax shook his head. They destroyed 3 cruisers in 9 seconds. The room fell silent. Outside the war chamber, the capital city of Dravan continued its normal rhythms. Markets opened. Ships departed from orbital ports. Millions of citizens went about their lives unaware that the fate of their civilization was being decided beneath the mountain. Thyrax looked around the table at his commanders. For the first time, he said quietly, the Dominion faces a species that does not fear us. He turned back toward the star map. Far across the galaxy, 4,000 human warships waited in perfect silence. Their weapons armed. Their commanders watching the clock. Thyrax understood the situation clearly. If the Dominion advanced, humanity would strike. And if those strange weapons were as powerful as they appeared, Corvaxis itself could die. For the first time in 1,000 years of conquest, the Varn Dominion had encountered a civilization willing to risk everything. The warlord exhaled slowly. Prepare the withdrawal plan, he said. The High Command looked at him in shock. The Dominion does not retreat, Corvus whispered. Thyrax's orange eyes glowed in the dim light. We do today. Because for the first time in the history of the Dominion, the prey had become the greater predator. 6 hours remained on the deadline. Across the galaxy, thousands of observers were watching. The Concord Council broadcast had become the most widely viewed transmission in recorded history. Trade stations, research outposts, distant colonies, and entire planetary governments had tuned into the live feed from Athos Prime. Everyone was waiting for the same thing. Would the Varn Dominion retreat? Or would the first true interstellar war in centuries begin? Inside the Concord Hall, the atmosphere felt heavier than before. 42 council delegates remained seated in absolute silence. High Arbiter Zorith had suspended all other proceedings until the deadline passed. Ambassador Daniel Reyes sat calmly in his chair, hands folded in front of him. He appeared relaxed. But inside he was counting every minute. Because far across the spiral arm, 4,000 human warships were holding their positions near the edge of Varn territory. Waiting. On the bridge of the UES Thermopylae, Admiral Marcus Rourke stood beside the forward viewport. The stars beyond the glass were steady and silent. Behind him, hundreds of officers monitored tactical displays covering every wall of the command deck. 4 hours remaining, Captain Mara Singh reported. Any movement from the Dominion fleet? Rourke asked. None. The captain hesitated. They're holding position around the occupied systems. Rourke nodded slowly. They're thinking. Across the bridge, a new message indicator flashed on the communications console. Singh checked the signal. Her eyes widened slightly. Admiral, we have an incoming transmission. From the council? No. She turned toward him. It's direct. Rourke walked over. The encryption signature appeared on the screen. Varn Dominion, priority channel. The warlord was calling. Rourke activated the transmission. The image of Warlord Thyrax appeared on the main display. The Conqueror looked different than he had in the Concord Hall. The arrogance was gone. His orange eyes were dimmer now. He studied the human admiral carefully before speaking. For a century, Thyrax said slowly, the galaxy believed humanity was weak. Rourke said nothing. The warlord glanced toward something off-screen. Likely the sensor feed showing the massive human fleet position just beyond his territory. We underestimated you. Silence stretched between them. Finally Thyrax spoke again. The Dominion will withdraw from the 3 occupied systems. On the bridge of the Thermopylae, several officers visibly relaxed. But Rourke's expression did not change. Full withdrawal, he said. Yes. All military assets removed. Yes. All Varn forces beyond the border within 48 hours. Thyrax nodded once. Rourke leaned slightly closer to the screen. And the colonies of New Manila and Shenzhen IV? The warlord's voice remained steady. Untouched. The admiral studied him for a moment longer. Then we have an agreement. Back on Athras Prime, the news reached the Concord Hall within minutes. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in disbelief. Some species expressed their emotions openly, gas clouds swirling violently in containment fields, insectoid diplomats clicking their mandibles in astonishment. High Arbiter Zorith remained silent. His golden eyes rested on Ambassador Reyes. You did it, the Arbiter said quietly. Daniel shook his head. No. He glanced toward the massive projection of the human fleet still displayed above the chamber. We convinced them. Across the galaxy, reports began arriving. Varn fleets were already leaving the conquered systems. Their ships were turning away from Alori space. Orbital blockades were dissolving. In underground shelters across the 3 invaded worlds, civilians slowly began emerging from hiding. For the first time in weeks, the skies above their cities were empty. On the bridge of the Thermopylae, Admiral Rourke watched the tactical display update. Varn fleet movements appeared as red icons slowly retreating toward their own territory. Captain Singh exhaled quietly. They're really doing it. Rourke nodded. Maintain position. Yes, sir. We stay here until every one of their ships crosses the border. Singh smiled slightly. Understood. The admiral looked back out through the viewport. 4 days the fleet had been ready to unleash weapons powerful enough to destroy an entire civilization. Collapse warheads sat armed in their launch tubes. Thousands of human soldiers had prepared themselves for the possibility of war. Now the stars beyond the glass remained peaceful. The galaxy had stepped back from the edge. And for the first time in centuries, an empire had retreated not because it was defeated, but because someone had finally refused to surrender. The Varn withdrawal was confirmed within 12 hours. Across 3 star systems, Dominion warships powered down their weapons and began the long journey back toward their own borders. Orbital blockades dissolved. Occupation forces abandoned military bases. Transport ships filled with soldiers lifted away from planets they had believed they would conquer. For the first time since the invasion began, the skies above the Alori homeworld were empty. In the capital city of Lareth, thousands of citizens slowly emerged from underground shelters where they had been hiding for weeks. Some stared at the sky in disbelief. Others cried openly. A small Alori child tugged at her mother's sleeve. Are they gone? She asked softly. Her mother nodded. Yes. The child looked upward again. Who made them leave? The mother hesitated. Then she used the only word she knew. Humans. Back on Athras Prime, the Concord Council had reconvened for what would become the most important session in its history. The chamber was quieter than Daniel Reyes had ever seen it. No arguments. No frantic debates. Only silence. 42 representatives sat in their seats, studying the human ambassador as if they were seeing him for the first time. High Arbiter Zorith rose slowly from the central platform. The Ven Dominion has confirmed full withdrawal, he announced. His voice echoed across the chamber. The 3 occupied systems have been liberated. The statement hung in the air. No one applauded. The moment was too large for something as simple as celebration. Zorith turned toward the human seat. This outcome was achieved entirely through the actions of Earth. Daniel stood. He could feel every gaze in the chamber following him. You prevented a war that would have devastated multiple civilizations, Zorith continued. His golden eyes studied the ambassador carefully. The Council wishes to know what Earth requires in return. Several delegates leaned forward. Territory was the obvious expectation. Humanity now possessed the most powerful fleet in known space. They could demand new colonies, trade dominance, permanent leadership within the Council. Anything. Zorith spread his arms slightly. Name your price. The room waited. Daniel looked around the chamber. At the Torvon delegate who had argued for surrender. At the Chinari diplomat who had called sacrificing 12 systems the logical choice. At the Alori representative whose species had nearly been erased. He felt no anger toward them. Only understanding. Fear made people do desperate things. But fear could not be allowed to rule the future. Earth wants one thing, Daniel said. The chamber leaned closer. A new law. Confusion flickered across several faces. Daniel walked toward the center of the chamber. The holographic display activated above him. He tapped the console. A single sentence appeared in glowing letters. No member civilization of the Concord shall ever be offered as a sacrifice to an aggressor. The delegates stared at it. Daniel spoke quietly. For centuries this council has preserved peace by trading away the lives of weaker civilizations. No one interrupted him. That ends today. He looked directly at the assembly. No colony. No world. No people. Will ever again be surrendered simply because fighting would be inconvenient. The words hung in the air. Daniel continued. If the Concord Council is going to represent something more than fear. His voice remained calm. Then it must stand for something that cannot be negotiated. Silence filled the chamber. High Arbiter Zorith studied the sentence floating above the platform. Then he slowly turned to the council. The motion is on the floor, he said. One by one the seats began to glow. Green. Turvan. Green. Chinari. Green. Sylvine. Green. Across the chamber the lights continued appearing. Even the species that had supported surrender only days earlier now voted in favor. Within seconds the entire hall glowed emerald. 42 votes. Unanimous. The law passed. Daniel looked around the chamber. The galaxy had just changed. Not through conquest. Not through destruction. But through a single moment when someone finally refused to accept the old rules. High Arbiter Zorith looked back at him. You have altered the course of galactic history, Ambassador Reyes. Daniel shook his head slightly. No. He glanced toward the distant stars visible through the chamber windows. We just reminded the galaxy what courage looks like. And somewhere far beyond the council chamber, 4,000 human warships were already beginning the long journey home. In the weeks that followed the crisis, the galaxy began to change. Not suddenly. Civilizations rarely transformed overnight. But slowly, like light spreading through deep water, the effects of what humanity had done reached farther and farther across the stars. The Ven Dominion retreated fully behind its borders. Their fleets disappeared from the contested systems. Occupation forces dismantled their bases and abandoned the territories they had seized. Entire battle groups returned to Varn space without firing another shot. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion had been forced to step backward. And every civilization in the galaxy had watched it happen. Trade stations replayed the Concord broadcast endlessly. News networks across dozens of species translated Ambassador Reyes' speech into hundreds of languages. The moment when the human fleet appeared above the Varn border became legend almost immediately. 4,000 ships emerging from faster-than-light travel. Stars disappearing behind a wall of dark metal. An empire realizing it had finally encountered something stronger than itself. But that was not the part most civilizations remembered. The part they talked about, the part that spread through universities, military academies, and political chambers, was what happened afterward. Humanity had won. And then they had asked for nothing. No territory. No tribute. No revenge. Just a single law. Across the galaxy, that idea unsettled many old powers. Because for thousands of years, strength had always meant domination. Until now. On the Alori homeworld, reconstruction began immediately. Cities damaged during the brief Varn occupation were repaired. Orbital defenses were rebuilt. Human engineers arrived with supply ships filled with construction drones and medical equipment. They asked for no payment. They simply helped. The Alori ambassador returned to Athras Prime 2 weeks later. She did not bring a speech. She did not bring gifts. Instead she walked into Daniel Reyes' office quietly. For several seconds she simply stood there. Then she stepped forward and took the human ambassador's hands in both of her own. Her silver fur trembled slightly. "Thank you," she said. For her people, those 2 words carried the weight of an entire civilization. Daniel nodded once. That's what neighbors are supposed to do. In the Concord Hall, workers began making changes. For 130 years humanity's seat had been placed in the outer ring of the chamber, the section reserved for junior civilizations. That arrangement no longer made sense. A new platform was installed. Larger. Closer to the center. Among the senior species. No one objected. Not the Torvan. Not the Chinari. Not even the oldest races who had once viewed humanity as inexperienced newcomers. Because everyone in the chamber understood something now. Power did not always announce itself. Sometimes it sat quietly in the smallest chair in the room, watching, learning, preparing. Far from the council chambers, the human Blackthorn fleet moved silently through the darkness between stars. 4,000 warships traveled in perfect formation, their engines glowing softly as they returned to human territory. Weapons powered down. Launch systems deactivated. Collapse warheads secured once again inside their armored vaults. The fleet had crossed half the galaxy prepared to fight the largest war in centuries. Instead, they were going home without firing a single shot in anger. On the bridge of the UES Thermopylae, Admiral Marcus Rourke stood alone near the viewport. The stars drifted slowly past the glass. Captain Singh approached quietly. Navigation reports will reach the Sol system in 2 days. Rourke nodded. Good. Singh hesitated. Sir, I was thinking about something. Yes. She glanced at the tactical display showing the massive fleet behind them. We were ready to destroy an empire. Rourke looked out at the stars again. Yes. And they believed we would. That's why they retreated. Singh studied him for a moment. You think they'll try again someday? Rourke considered the question carefully. Maybe. He folded his hands behind his back. But if they do? He glanced at the silent fleet surrounding the flagship. They'll remember what happened the last time. Singh smiled faintly. The galaxy had learned something important. Humanity did not seek conquest. Humanity did not hunger for power. But if someone threatened the innocent, if someone believed fear would force humanity to surrender its people, then the quiet species from a small blue world would stand up. And when they stood up, even empires listened. Across distant worlds and alien civilizations, a new story began to spread. Children heard it in classrooms. Soldiers heard it in military academies. Diplomats heard it whispered in council chambers. It was the story of a young species that had once been underestimated. A species that had sat patiently in the smallest seat at the table while the rest of the galaxy believed it harmless. Until the day someone threatened their home. That was the day the galaxy learned a truth it would never forget. Humans did not build power to rule. They built power so that one day, when the moment came, they could choose not to use it. And that choice changed everything.